Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Perceptive Podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I'm, of course, Josh Bycer, and we have a great cast lined up tonight. My guest is the developer of the Faith Trilogy, a modern retro horror experience with lots of 8-bit disturbing visuals and hearing the word mortis quite a bit. And he is on to discuss that as well as horror design. So, please welcome to the cast tonight, Airdorf. How are you doing?
Hey, how's it going, Josh? Good to see you.
It is great to have you on. I've been really looking forward to this one. I'm so glad that you reached out to me on Twitter.
Yeah.
So, this has definitely been one I've been looking forward to. For those of you who don't know, my fourth book that I wrote is going to be all about the horror genre. I did mention faith as well as just like indie horror in it. It's such a fascinating genre, especially with how much horror has changed and evolved over like the last 3 years.
Oh, yeah. That's really cool that you're writing a book on the horror genre.
Mm-hmm.
You ever read what's his name? Bernard Perron. He does a lot of or Kirkpatrick. They do a lot of books on horror.
No, I have not. If you can send me those links afterwards, I'll take a look at them.
Yeah, Bernard Perron, he did like a book on the genre, and then he did a Silent Hill kind of retrospective study.
Oh, yes. And we certainly have a lot to talk about tonight. And Oscar in the chat is listing some of the games as well. I've played the Drax games. The Tiger handheld one. That was another very interesting one.
Oh, you played Summer Night?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, that one's one of my favorites. It was a huge challenge, like creating it in the space of like 10 days, more like 2 weeks, but I'm really proud of how it came out, and I think it's one of my favorites.
Nice. And yeah, we certainly have a lot here we can discuss. So, I guess to get things started with, since this is your first time on, for people who don't know who you are, could you talk a little bit about your background and what is the Faith Trilogy?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Airdorf. Hi. I like making games, and I started kind of getting serious about it with my first official game release, which was Faith in 2017. It's a pixel horror game that kind of harkens back to the satanic scare of the 1980s, and also the kind of the golden era of your 8-bit retro titles. So there's a lot of callbacks to like the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64, Atari 2600. And I've been working on it on and off since then, trying to expand it. I have a publishing deal with New Blood Interactive, and I also do some contract work. I did The Wind, Extraordinary, and Attack of the Murder Hornets, which was a collab with Torple Duke, a friend of mine, and Torple and I also did Earl's Day Off. And am I missing any? I think that covers all of them. And yeah, my background was originally animation. I was studying that for several years, and then I switched to games. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to bring something really special with the Unholy Trinity, which is all 3 chapters of Faith kind of compiled into one package with updates and DLC and some extra features. And that'll be on Steam. So real busy.
Nice.
On the finish.
And for the people watching us live right now, if you have any questions for Airdorf about faith, horror design, whatever, feel free to leave them in the chat and we'll get to them as they show up. And so I guess my first question for you is, what kind of attracted you to work with horror as kind of like your breakout when it comes to game dev?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I love games. I played them most of my life, and I like all kinds of games, not just horror. But there's just something about the horror genre that I think is really, really special. Maybe it's like nostalgic for me. I remember playing Fatal Frame, the first Fatal Frame in high school. We rented one from the store and we played it. We tried to get as far as we could in one night, but it was way too scary. We had to quit. And Fatal Frame 2 was like infamous in my life for being the game that I kept trying to play, but I always got too scared to finish. And I actually just now finished it maybe like 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And I don't know, there's something about it that I always really liked. I always liked horror movies and things like the supernatural, like ghosts and like paranormal stuff, like cryptids and things like that have always really interested me. And so to be able to experience the feeling of being in one of those situations or encountering one of those creatures or being in one of those settings and being able to kind of capture that in a game, I think is really special. And right around the time that PT came out in 2014, I had been watching like horror let's plays like on the indie side from like Markiplier and uh, Four Player Podcast and Jacksepticeye for a really long time. And I was thinking about making a game around the time that PT came out. I got really inspired. PT being my all-time favorite horror game, and I didn't have the graphical capability to like, right around the time it got canceled, there were a lot of developers that were kind of making PT kind of clones or games that kind of captured that vibe, or at least tried to. And I didn't really know how to program the graphics to do that. So I thought to myself, what if I made a horror game that used just basic graphics? And that was kind of my design challenge. And I just worked on it for a couple of years on and off, like in my spare time, and I just released it one day. And it happened to resonate with some people. 3 years later, I have like a literal cult following who are like banging on my door, demanding to know when Chapter 3 is going to be finished every day. So
We may have a few of those in chat too.
okay, yeah, and so that's kind of my background as far as horror goes. I have other game design ideas that aren't horror, but I figure like at this point in my kind of indie dev career, I can focus on what I'm good at, and I really really enjoy kind of thinking about what's scary, and I'll be walking around or doing work or something and thinking about a situation that could be made into a horror game and stuff like that. And I don't know, in person I'm a kind of a happy person, it's just that the horror genre has always been real special to me, and so I think it's, as a creative person, I guess it was just natural for me to try to deliver that experience through a game. I also really, really like the horror let's play communities. I think it's like the funnest thing to watch someone play like a scary game and have everyone like react to it.
And I think it's funny that I think we're like two peas in the same pot when it comes to a lot of these horror talks. Because I love the Fatal Frame series growing up, and I've said this before. Like number 3 is one that just like it scared the horror out of me. Like I was like
Really?
I couldn't play a lot of horror games before then. Then I played 3, and it basically it gave me like the jump scare immunity because it scared me so much when I played that one.
Really, I'm gonna have to go back and play it. I started it, but I never finished it. 2 is Crimson Butterfly would be, in my opinion, a master class in horror design, especially the first parts of it. And I really, really like it, and it's one of my all-time favorites. But regrettably, I have not finished 3. I don't even think I finished 1. I think I just went straight into 2. So yeah, I'll have to put Fatal Frame 3 back on my list. I've been playing Resident Evil Village now for the past couple of weeks, and just now finished my first run recently. And so I'm still kind of like basking in the glow of the Resident Evil 8. But yeah, I'm looking for a new game to play after that.
Yeah, I finished Resident Evil 8 like the week it came out. We just blazed right through it on stream. And
I wish I had done that. I wish I'd done that because I don't know why when big games come out, why everyone has to put spoilers in the thumbnails of their YouTube videos.
Yep.
So I'm just like innocently like looking through YouTube, just like scanning, and all of a sudden it's like this thing explained, and I'm like, I didn't even know that thing was in the game, and that looks really, really scary, and now I'm spoiled.
Yeah, and that was part of the reason why I wanted to play as quickly as I could, because I knew that it was just going I think the 2 days before it came out, people were already putting thumbnail spoilers up on that game.
Yeah,
And that's always been like the
I
weird
wish they
thing.
wouldn't do that, but I
Yeah.
guess it serves me right for sleeping on it. So I'm old school. I have a Windows 7 that won't play Resident Evil Village, so I had to appropriate some equipment that had Windows 10 on it, so
Mm.
I could only play it sparingly. But yeah, I waited like a while, and I guess that's what I get for
Mm.
not jumping on the hype train.
Yeah, and like for me, like I'm like the same way in terms of like I'm like the very happy guy, but I think about horror and I come with all these like very like horror scenarios in my head, probably from all the horror games that I play. It reminds me a lot when I like read interviews from Junji Ito, that everyone describes like he's this nice and happy individual, and then he draws somebody's face exploding and like tentacles and
Yeah,
eyeballs all over the place.
yeah, he's quite the character. I love his art though.
hmm
His stuff is so cool. What definitely an inspiration visually for Faith.
hmm And I think one thing that I wanted to go back to is you said like with developing faith and like kind of focusing on the kind of like lo-fi or 8-bit style. I was just wondering how has it been, I guess, working in it? Like obviously for people watching us, you can see a very happy-go-lucky individual as Airdorf's portrait there. But kind of like focusing on that style, and this kind of will lead into some questions about kind of the horror genre today. But I guess what has it been like designing a game purposely to have that 8-bit very not sure what term I want to use like
Yeah.
a very like impact or very like rustic kind of look to it.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Technically I did several things that kind of shot me in the foot, like having a kind of a steady, streamlined workflow. One of them is that I looked up the quote unquote original screen resolution or pixel resolution of the Atari 2600. I was like, I'll just start there, and it's something like 192 by 160 pixels, and that does not scale well to like modern resolutions for screens. So all the graphics in Faith are actually scaled by 675% or times 6.75. It's not even a round number. And so you get a lot of things that are graphics that are like misaligned. I have to go like pixel by pixel, and it's kind of a nightmare. So there's one challenge, but that has more to do with my own lack of foresight than than the challenge of the medium itself. I think the biggest challenge visually is communicating what I want to communicate with the level of abstraction that I want to have to kind of be a throwback to that graphical era. And so it's a struggle between graphics or sprites or characters that are or objects or monsters that are refined enough or exact or specific enough to communicate what I want them to be, and also maintaining that nostalgic chunky pixel look. And it's a real balance. I find myself having to go back and being like, this can be more basic looking.
Yeah.
This can look more primitive. And so, but one of the best moments, for me as a horror developer is when I get the golden reaction, in my opinion, to something coming out after you on the screen, which is like, oh my gosh, what the F is that? Like, if I can get that reaction after a long period of dread and anticipation, then that makes me really happy as a horror, creator, because then I've done my job.
hmm
So, if you didn't even count the rotoscoped cutscenes that are very specific and very lifelike, then I would hope that at least the graphics kind of scare you with that fear of the unknown, but they're also recognizable enough that they're dangerous or something.
hmm
And that brings me to the rotoscoped cutscenes. Those are also kind of a technical challenge. I film myself acting them out, and then I take the footage and I trace over it with a brush in Photoshop, frame by frame, 15 frames per second. And it used to take a really long time to do when I was just using my mouse on my desktop, but now I have this. I have a pen display tablet that makes it really easy for me. It's a lot more natural to trace over things and draw out the frames. I can even do a little extra and do, some of my, call back to some of my animation training and add some effects or add some extra stuff.
Hmm. I'm glad you brought up the rotoscoping cutscenes because I was just about to bring that because yeah, like those are just impressive to look at, and I have to ask, like from a technical standpoint, was that something possible that could have been done back then using the 8-bit style, or is this kind of more like of an original technique, or something that isn't really, I guess quote unquote period piece or period accurate?
Yeah, sure. I'm not an expert on that. I do know that the original Prince of Persia. When did the original Prince of Persia
Yeah.
come out? Let's see.
Ooh, I was like
Prince
88.
of Persia original.
We're both looking
Well,
up at the
let's
same
see.
time.
1989, so close.
Ah,
It was,
by
in,
one.
it was in development in 1988, so that's you're still close. So that uses rotoscoped animations, but they're scaled down and the sprites are actually very small.
Mhm.
And developers back then, they were wizards at compressing everything down to fit into the tiny storage space that they had on those cartridges and diskettes and stuff. And that's something I could never do. I'm much too artistically minded. I just like to cram everything in. Actually, I learned about texture pages and sprite pages the hard way. So I was originally scaling. So the rotoscope cutscenes are upscaled. So they're actually each frame is actually very small. So if you have an okay graphics card, you should be able to run Faith and be able to enjoy the cutscenes, running at full 15 frames per second. And but they originally upscaled at the screen resolution, or they were imported into the game at screen resolution. So there was an entire texture page dedicated to each frame. So if you had anything south of like a higher end, NVIDIA dedicated graphics card, then the game would crash, or you wouldn't be able to load the game. So I learned a lot about optimization and managing graphics kind of the hard way. And you get a drop in quality when that happens, but I kind of like that, If I can give off the vibe that this is like a cursed MS DOS game that you found at like a garage sale without blatantly breaking the fourth wall and being real cheeky about it like creepypastas are, then I'll be happy.
Nice. And a question came in a few minutes ago. Oscar asked, "Is the camera part on the demo of Chapter 3 inspired by Fail Frame?" Then, as we were talking about Fail Frame earlier in the podcast.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually got that from the movie Saw, the first one. There's a sequence that's very similar to what I do in the Chapter 3 demo. And I think Cry of Fear did the same thing. There's a sequence with a camera at the very beginning that has the quintessential indie horror game jump scare is in Cry of Fear during the camera section. It's a free game, so none of y'all have any excuse not to play it.
Yeah, I need to add that one to my list too.
Oh, Cry of Fear is great. Have you ever played Lost in Vivo?
Oh yes, I did.
Akuma Kira. So it's like that, but with more action.
Ooh.
And it's got this really edgy 2010 2009 kind of emo storyline that I kind of miss from my childhood, so it's a little nostalgic for me. But it's got this great they pulled off a survival horror game in first person, which only a few games in my opinion do that really well, and Lost in Vivo being one of them.
Did you play? Oh, I'm sorry. Finish your thought.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say that the camera sequence is inspired by Cry of Fear, but mostly the movie Saw.
I was about to say, did you play the Condemned series by any chance?
I played Criminal Origins, and I used to watch 4Player Podcast play through the second one. The second, which I forget what the second one's called, but it's the one with the bear.
Yeah, the bear. And the death screaming.
Yeah. I've watched parts of that, but I did play through Criminal Origins.
I felt that was another really good first-person horror. I feel like a first-person survival horror, it usually swings one of two ways. It's either, very jump scare focus, or it's very just, combat oriented. and it's
Yeah.
harder to get that balance right.
Yeah, I got really annoying with the melee combat with in the first Condemned game, especially towards the end. I think I just couldn't figure out what to do with some of the enemies. And but I liked the creep factor in it. It's got some psychological horror stuff in there it's got some very, very good moments.
Hmm. And returning to Faith, another
Yeah.
major part about this game, besides the very raw 8-bit style, is of course the voice synthesizer. And as I said at the start, hearing the word Mortis quite a
Yeah.
bit. Was the voice synthesizer kind of like a part of the game at the beginning, or when did you decide to, have that as like a major point of the aesthetics?
Yeah, so when I was working on the original build of Faith, it was just in the woods. It was not the house didn't exist yet, and I didn't even have a name for Michael, who is the demon that chases you around in the woods. And originally, I ripped a bunch of game audio from Pokemon, and I think I spliced uh like Geodude, no, Graveler and Murkrow together, and it made this very jarring, kind of forlorn 8-bit like screech. And I used that at first. And I would I jumped a lot. Like I was the creator of the game and I would jump out of my seat whenever it would burst on the screen with that noise.
Hmm.
But I did know that I would eventually release this online and maybe even do a commercial release, so I figured I don't want Nintendo to get on me just yet. And so I started looking for other things to do, and um, there was this joke that some buddies of mine used to do. We used to get on one of the school computers, and we used to play like a joke version of Dungeons and Dragons. And there was a program on the school computers that had text to speech on it, and so the DM or the game master or whatever would communicate with us through that like speak and spell voice. It was really funny. And there's this one part, we were learning Spanish at the time, so there's this one part where there's a dragon or something, and we made some decision, and my friend typed en fuego muerte, which means on fire, dead, and the like muerte as like a game over like signal was really funny to us, and so yeah, I just translated into Latin and put it in the game. And I wanted to do I wanted to do like a memorable game over screen, because there's a lot of like one hit kills in Faith, and players end up dying a lot, so at least the game over screen can be a little entertaining. And it's very quick too. It just shows up, and then you can like cancel the audio and pop right back in, reload your save.
Hmm.
So I think it works well. And it's kind of funny how it kind of became like the motto or like the tagline for the game.
Oh yes.
But yeah, I love the speech synthesizer. It's an old abandonware synthesizer from the 70s, and they have emulation that you can do, and there's lots of cool little modulations you can make with it and stuff. And so and I do quite a bit of post processing after the fact. It's not just raw out of that synthesizer, and that's what I use for the voices.
Great. Oscar asked, any improvements planned for the synth voices? Sometimes it's hard to understand what they're saying, which works for the creepiness, though.
Yeah, so for the sake of creepiness, I would keep them like as rough around the edges. Maybe add an option where they get run through like a low pass filter so they don't hurt your ears as much. I love I love watching Let's Play videos on YouTube, and they're like, "This game is called Faith. I've heard it's pretty scary. I'm really excited to play it." And then they get to the opening cutscene, and it's like this soft music, and then you hear that September 21st, and it's really loud at their headphones. And I like to see the pain, but eventually they get used to it. But yeah, it's pretty jarring. I really like how crusty and kind of unrefined it is. So I'm probably not going to make any improvements, because I don't think it can be improved anymore. I think it's just fine the way it is.
Lilith asks, are deer somehow connected to the cult? And I know, of course, there is the deer ending in Faith Chapter 1.
That's right. Well, I think that nature and animals are always more susceptible to like the spiritual plane than humans are. I think they kind of have that quality. They have that, like that sixth sense. So no, I don't think they're exactly tied into. I didn't really plan them to be related to the cult that is like tormenting John throughout the game series, but they do have their own moments if you piss them off.
Let's see. Rob Seb asked, "Will we ever find out what was behind that door from the ending in the second game? The one with all the crosses nailed onto it."
Yeah, that's a very important door, and you'll learn more about it in the full game of Chapter 3.
Nice. And yeah, again, like the rawness, I think, is a really good. I think that's a really good segment talking more about horror in general, as well as kind of like what's going on with the full release of Faith. Like I said at the start, a lot I think of what we kind of call like or the indie horror genre has really exploded over we could say maybe the last 4 to 5 years. Like a lot of people will gravitate towards, Outlast, Amnesia, Five Nights. But
Yeah,
we've really been seeing a lot of very interesting designs come from indie developers. Especially, we mentioned, of course, Dread X earlier. And for those of you watching this live recorded, I did an interview with Ted and Star from the Dread X collection, and I'll include a link to that in the recorded version. But I want to get your thoughts, both as a fan and as well as a developer, of kind of like what is like the indie how has the indie scene really like grown or really impacted the horror genre?
yeah. I can't imagine horror games without the indie devs. Um, yeah, I think it's really cool how it's exploded. I remember a friend telling me about Slenderman in 2010, 2011. Yeah, 2011, and I loved it. And the fact that people could make such simple games, relatively quickly and share them, and there was kind of a more underground community, and something that really scare you and entertain you. You didn't have to wait for Capcom to release the next Resident Evil, or pray that someday Konami would make a decent Silent Hill game
Yeah.
again, or something like that. That's not to say that the AAA space doesn't put out good horror games, but the good stuff, if you want the good stuff, you got to go indie and you got to really explore. I I saw there was the Slender Man craze. Everybody wanted to do kind of a Slender clone or like a flashlight simulator, and then FNAF like literally changed the paradigm and kind of flipped it over on its head. And I have a lot of respect for those games, and FNAF 2 being probably one of the most like tense indie horror experiences that I've ever experienced. It the only thing I would fault it with is that it never lets you feel safe. Like
Hmm.
I think that the horror needs to come in waves. You need to play up safety so that you can shatter that feeling, and and
Hmm.
have there's this playful element or this kind of playful relationship between horror game designer and player that I strongly believe in. And then after that, there's still a bunch of FNAF fans and FNAF clones. And then you've got stuff like Inky and the Bending Machine. Um, what is it? Baldi's Basics, Hello Neighbor to some extent. Um, what was another one? There's one that's recent that's gotten a ton of attention. Happy's Burger Farm or something like
uh,
that. Night of the Consumers, stuff like that.
hmm.
And man, there's just so much to choose from. I mean, the horror section of itch.io is, it's expanding and updating every day. And, the algorithm on itch.io is a lot better for new devs. Like you can expect to be, if you get enough attention, you can expect to be at the top of the charts, for at least a little bit and, get some players, get some eyes on your product and stuff. But I do like how much it updates. If you go to Game Jolt, the horror genre is kind of more firmly cemented with kind of the older games. But um, there's literally something for everyone, you know. And I think that it's important to recognize that the tools for making games are more accessible and easier to use and learn and pick up than ever.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's very fascinating is just like, even like for somebody like myself who like, do as much about the independent scene as I can here on the channel. I play, write, do all that. Like, it took me quite a long time to really discover how much there is when it comes to indie horror, and a lot of that came from playing the first Dread X collection, and then that led me to the Haunted PlayStation 1 demo disc, and then just seeing more from the space. And it really has become like this very huge explosion. Like the games that we both mentioned, Five Nights, Night of the Consumer. Like we've seen these games kind of like bubble up into the point where major YouTubers will cover them, but
Yeah.
it's still, I think, very much that niche. Like we mentioned Lost in Vivo earlier. That came out, I think, a few years ago, and I didn't really hear about it until someone just like casually mentioned it to me late last year. Like a Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion would be like another big example of like one of those games that kind of came up.
Yeah, Kira is I really like the stuff that Kira and their team puts out. Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion, or Spooky's House of Jump Scares, I think it was originally called. I watched Markiplier play it, and then I waited a few years while it got updated, and then I played it for myself. And then I played it in VR, which is a great experience. And that is such a masterful horror game. I think it stands on it's great because it stands on its own. It has very few imitators, and it's so simple. And then there are parts that just, it's like there are parts that in that game that made the blood drain out of my face. It was so dreadful. And then Lost in Vivo, I think, was just an explosion of horror design expertise. There were parts of that game that just blew me away with how cleverly designed they were. And I respect Kira a lot for those games. Huge fan. There's also another one called Chilla's Art. They're on Steam. They have a ton of releases. They did a game called Inunaki Tunnel, which is it's like a urban legend in Japan about a haunted tunnel that's like boarded up and you can explore it. And yeah, that one was really good. They're kind of like first person puppet combo, but not as shocking. And then Puppet Combo, I can't say enough about how much Puppet Combo has changed and influenced the indie horror scene. I still maintain this. PT is my favorite horror game of all time, but Power Drill Massacre by Puppet Combo is, in my opinion, the scariest indie horror game of all time. I haven't even finished Nun Massacre, so for all I know, that's even scarier. But Power Drill Massacre affected me on such a deep level. Like every now and then I'll boot it up to play through it. And there was once I was involved in a book. I was going to write a chapter on this book, but it kind of fell through where I was actually writing about how well it adheres to like the slasher genre of horror, and just how effectively it delivers the scares in that game. But yeah, I have so much respect and admiration for the other developers in the indie horror game community, but it's exactly like you said, Josh. It's still kind of this kind of cult underground kind of thing, Scott Cawthon, say what you will about him, personally, but his design genius, or maybe he just got really lucky with the first FNAF and then just kind of ran with the horror design of it. But I was blown away when I went to church one Sunday, and in the pew in front of me was like a 6-year-old kid with a Freddy Fazbear plush toy. I was like, hey parents, if you knew the backstory and the lore behind what your kid was playing with. What
Oh,
do they care?
yeah, I went to like a doctor's office like one time, and like they had like drawings from kids, and they had all these like Five Nights at Freddy's drawings. I'm like, wait, what? What?
What
Why is
possessed
this
this
here?
kid to do Five Nights at Freddy's drawings and put him? Oh, the hospital staff was like, "This is interesting. let's clip it up." Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I was blown away when I saw how mainstream it was getting. Like, I started seeing FNAF plushies in vending machines, like at Walmart. At crane machines, and like
Hmm.
seeing like FNAF stickers and memorabilia and stuff. Bending ink machine. Uh, did I call it Inky and the Bend Machine? I don't know. Bendy and the Ink Machine is the proper title for it. Um, they have merchandise and stuff, so I don't know if Faith really has the appeal to young people. From what I understand, some young people that really like Faith and are fans of it. And I have merchandise and stuff, but I don't know if it could ever be as famous as like or as kind of big as FNAF and Bendy, but I was just really proud, I guess, of my people, I guess you could call them, that um, you know that it kind of broke through the mold,
Hmm.
and it just goes to show you. I mean, look at Undertale. Anybody who sits on Game Maker for long enough and has that vision and gets gets a little lucky and has a cool game. They can make the big time, and now Sans is technically in Smash Brothers,
Hmm.
as a skin, I guess. But yeah, it's just nothing but admiration. I wish we could connect more. I wish it was easier for me to kind of network and um, hang out with some of these devs. I wish the world would kind of get back to normal again so that we can start going to like physical locations and meeting there. But for now, I'm thankful that we have the technology to like do like Discord and
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Yeah. Uh, a few more questions regarding kind of the indie horror scene, but before we get to them, a few more chat questions came in.
Yeah.
Rob Seb asked, your influences in particular, the Satanic Panic is easy to see. However, what was the reason you decided to go with cults, religion, and faith as themes for the series?
Yeah, so I don't know if they were here earlier, but I said that like supernatural horror, like ghosts and like demons and like religious kind of horror and stuff, that really appeals to me. I'm Christian, but I'm not a Catholic, so I don't have I don't quite I don't think they quite have it right, but I'm really entertained by it. This kind of like that there's this like ritualistic kind of formula to like kicking a demon out, and of course in the movies it never goes right, and that was that kind of went along with the satanic scare, so that seemed like a natural fit. I wanted to make a game without guns, just because I think everybody's got guns in games, so I figured why not have a form of combat that was a little more horror based and that literally requires faith to use. Sometimes when John points the cross it doesn't do anything, so you have to do another thing, and yet you might have to run away. And like as someone who follows a religion, I've had my own struggles with faith and kind of where I stand, in the whole scheme of things, and themes of guilt and redemption and forgiveness, things like that. They definitely find their way. Those specific questions and concerns and doubts even that I've had in my life definitely kind of wind their way through faith. And in a lot of ways, the main character, John Ward, is kind of a reflection of my own feelings on religion sometimes, and I guess the struggle, quote unquote. And so it was easy for me to kind of inject kind of a personal level of like lore and backstory to John and kind of flesh out his character. Plus, it's literally me in all of his rotoscoped cutscenes. Uh,
Yeah.
yes. So anyway, that would be one of the reasons, a few reasons why I went with kind of the religious angle. I also don't think there's a lot of religious horror in games. It was a lot of zombies for a while, and then it was a lot of animatronics for a while.
Ooh.
You can guess why. But like the demon aspect and the ghost aspect was something I was always really interested in. And I figured that demons, they don't have any. They can be as abstract as you want them to be, and I kind of wanted to hit that vein along the lines of Silent Hill, where the monsters are very symbolic and very kind of abstract.
Mhm. And I think part of like why a lot of developers like kind of keep away from religion is that I think religion has always been considered one of those like quote unquote taboo topics for a lot of game developers, especially like for console developers. Like for those of you who
Yeah,
don't remember, like Nintendo and Sega were very strict in terms of what content they would allow on their consoles.
that's right. I yeah, I really hope that getting getting Faith on Switch eventually is not happening anytime soon, but when we eventually get to the Switch port, I really hope that they take a chance on us. If they could, I believe Blasphemous is is on the Switch, so that probably means that
And the
that
Binding of
they'll.
Isaac too.
Oh yeah, if they can put Binding of Isaac on Switch, they can put Faith on Switch. Yeah, but
Uh,
wait till they see the really horrifying stuff in Chapter 3 that they won't even make it past Nintendo.
there you go. There's a good teaser for everyone watching. Oscar asked in chat. This question just scrolled off. Let me get back here. Where is it? Okay, here it is. What are your thoughts on the current slowly gaining speed of the PS1 low poly trend?
Oh
And
yeah, I love it. Yeah, it makes total sense. I think that nostalgia kind of goes 20 years back, and so our nostalgic era is currently the 90s. Um, so I'm late to the party. I made my low poly N64 game in Earl's Day Off. But yeah, I love it. I hope to make one someday. In fact, I was working on a 3D Faith game that was a lot like Silent Hill, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, with a very prominent indie horror game developer. And I worked on it for about a week and didn't really go anywhere. We kind of broke it off, but I hope to someday work with them again if they'll have me, and I hope to someday have enough time, and when I get done with releasing the Unholy Trinity, I hope to the make that 3D game.
let's
I would like to do a PS2 throwback though,
nice.
instead of just PS1. I really miss the era of the PS2 um, survival horror game.
I, I mean, the PlayStation 2 is like really like one like the was like the second golden age of games. Like so many great games on that console.
Yeah, I never owned a PS2. I stopped owning consoles after the N64, and it's just too much money to keep up with all of it. And I don't know how people do it. I don't know how people can shell out like $69.99 now for like a AAA game when it comes out pre-order, and just like throw their money into the wind and be like, well, I hope this game that I'm pre-ordering isn't broken.
Mm, yeah, but like for me, it's I get press keys and I wait for game sales. I have more than enough games to like, keep me occupied for a very
Oh
long
yeah,
time.
yeah. I figured y'all would get like free hookups through with for like review copies and stuff.
Hmm. And of course, Humble Bundle, Fanatical, Green Man. Like, there's so many sales these days that the chat here knows, or my chat knows, that I play quite a lot of games these days on my streams.
That's good.
Hmm.
Must be nice to have the time.
Yeah,
I have to
that's the only time
I
that
have to
I
like
have.
scrounge and scratch for time to play games now.
And then the days I'm writing and editing videos, so the streams are pretty much where I kind of focus my game playing for like a brief period of time.
Yeah, good deal. So what are you playing? What are you playing now these days that you like?
Ooh. We've been playing a lot of like roguelikes. Tonight we're checking out a Rogue Book, which is like another deck building roguelike.
Oh, cool.
Platformers. And of course, whenever I get a chance or whenever I see something new, a new horror game, I did play through The Hunt when it was released a few months ago.
Oh, the Dread X the Hunt.
Mm-hmm.
that one was good. I liked I was real I really liked Torple Duke's game on that one, Black Relic.
Oh
And
yeah,
then what else did I play? I started playing the camera one. That one was cool.
yeah, like that one, and oh yeah, just so many games. We just finished a few Metroidvania games,
Oh
Lost
yeah.
Ruins, Fearmonium, and right now, and of course, I just finished Resident Evil 8 a few weeks ago. And I recently replayed Doom Eternal, which is not horror, but definitely on the brutal side.
Yeah, your blood will get pumping playing Doom Eternal.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like such a traitor. I never finished it. By the time I was done with the right before the final level, I was like, I don't want to play anymore. Like I feel like I've experienced all there is to experience in the game. And I don't know, it's just unpopular opinion, but I much prefer Doom 2016. That's not to say that Doom Eternal is not a well crafted, like well designed game, and it's like game loop is like super intense, and the game does a really good job of introducing all the new mechanics and gadgets, and just kind of gradually ramping up to this like insane play style that you have to adopt
Mm-hmm.
to survive. It's just I liked the simplicity of 2016, the relative simplicity of 2016, much more.
Yeah.
But some of my cohorts at New Blood were involved in Doom Eternal, and well, actually, just one of them did the music for the Old Gods. So feel like I should eventually pick it up again. It was just kind of it was like when I watched the movie Avatar, not the Last Airbender, but James Cameron's. It was like it was so much that I liked it, but I didn't want to play it anymore after
Mm-hmm.
that. I didn't want to watch it again anymore after that.
Yeah. And I can see that it is such a. It can be exhausting to play games like that. I'm really
Yeah,
looking forward to Ultra Kill from the stream about New Blood and Gloomwood.
Ultra Kill.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hakita has made like a monster with Ultra Kill,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm super impressed and inspired by it.
Oh yes.
It's just blows me away. Like I really do think that like it's already this era is already here, but I think it's only just going to grow stronger that indie games,
Mm-hmm.
either on a shoestring budget or on a relatively low budget than AAA games. I really think they're going to start eclipsing AAA releases. I didn't I can't really I can't really give my definitive opinion on E3 because I didn't watch the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of my friends who watched the whole thing were really underwhelmed by it
Mm-hmm.
because, and I don't know if it was the pandemic, it just slowed everything down. That's probably it. But I think we're going to start to see kind of, if we think we're in an indie renaissance now, I think in the next decade or so, it like a lot of these indie games are really just going to rival AAA games.
Mm-hmm.
Because AAA games they use so much tricks. So I'm speaking generally, obviously not all big titles do this, but like you can typically expect some level of microtransactions. Someone in the chat mentioned monetization and stuff like that. That I like. I think you should be free to put that in your game if you want. But just because you put it in there doesn't mean it's not scummy. And I've paid for microtransactions, like I paid for like extra content and stuff, and um, but I think people, especially when they get older, they get less and less time to play games, and so you have what they call the attention economy, right? So it's like
Mm-hmm.
I have like 4 hours in the day to sit down in my chair and play games. What am I going to play?
Mm-hmm.
And there's hundreds of games being released every day. A lot of them don't make it in front of players, to enjoy them. But eventually, people are going to get turned off by what are, in my opinion, blatant attempts to just kind of trap you in the game
Mm-hmm.
and keep you like dangling, keep the carrot kind of dangling in front of you so that you'll keep playing. But
And
I totally respect people's like freedom to play whatever the hell they want to play. That's just how I feel about kind of the accessibility or the immediacy of indie games versus the commitment to play a AAA game.
mhm. Yeah, and I've been, I think, quietly or slowly like weaning off of a lot of AAA releases. Because like you sound like a lot of the audience, I'm sure, is well aware of. Like, there's just so many creative and imaginative games from the independent space that it's hard to go back to the umpteenth open world game or competitive shooter or things like that.
For me, it's difficult personally. I have friends who have absolutely no problem shelling out the money for a new release when it comes out from the AAA space, and B, playing it over the course of a week and then moving on to the next one. And
Mm-hmm.
they've platinumed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't have the time to do that. I don't know how they do have the time to do that. They have a
Mm-hmm.
time turner from Harry Potter. They just go back in time and keep playing.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoy AAA games a lot. I'm a huge For Honor fan. When For Honor came out in 2016, I was like way into it, and I still play it every now and then until I rage quit and uninstall it. And the cycle continues.
Yeah.
And I finished Resident Evil Village recently, so there's some that I like, but uh, my wallet and the time I have to play, and just like maybe it's like my ADD or ADHD that like makes me want to keep jumping around. But I do think people are going to start seeing more and more the value of like an hour-long game, even a 20-minute game. That's something truly unique versus
Mm-hmm.
maybe a formula or graphical style that they've seen over and over again. But of course, I respect what everyone wants to play. Like, it's their time, it's their choice, it's their life.
So, one thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of horror is kind of like that push and pull between, difficulty when it comes to horror design.
Yeah,
And you, of course, mentioned Puppet Combo. I'm glad that you did because I was going to bring them up. Puppet Combo makes some very hard horror games.
yeah.
I haven't played yet, but I've seen some plays of Nun Massacre,
Oh,
and
right.
yeah, that looks like it's definitely a step above what I think a lot of people expect. And what I wanted to ask you about is that we see these kinds of, I think, like two different trends when it comes to horror. That there's the more, observant, or you're more of the audience horror, where you're kind of going through the motions. It's very jump scare focused and then it just ends. And then
Yeah,
you have that very brutal, like the Puppet Combo. I played a White Labyrinth, I think that's what it was called, a few weeks ago, where it's like, yeah, we're going to just like hit you over the head. We're going to have a guy who's going to stalk you, and the second you make a mistake, they're coming running with a hatchet kind of difficulty. And
yeah. Very little room for error.
yeah, so I just want to get your thoughts on that as a horror fan designer. Like, what kind of, like, do you have a preference for, I guess, how hard should a horror game be?
Yeah, I um I agree. I agree that his games are really tough, and I don't know. That's a good question. I I think that like a difficulty should be balanced enough or like challenging enough so that at least some people can finish your game.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's a lot of discussion now about accessibility, about like should there be, should you include an easier way to complete your game for the people that need an easier difficulty to even finish. And I think it's a really interesting kind of issue, but my gut instinct is that a creator of a game should make it as hard as they want to make it. A lot of us make games for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
One reason that I made Faith was because I was tired of kind of the zombie crafting survival games that had
Mm-hmm.
come out, and the oh like FNAF clones and Slender clones and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one reason why I wanted to kind of do something different. But Faith is hard too. It's got a lot of one hit KOs, especially with the boss fights and stuff, and it can get kind of frustrating. I've seen at least one big time YouTuber like get super frustrated with the final boss of chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so should I change the difficulty? I don't know. What's easy for one player is really hard for another player,
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa. And so I think that your game should be able to be completed. I think it should be easier. A rule of thumb for me is that uh, difficulty should be something that like a streamer or a YouTuber could finish. Because I want like Faith was very much geared towards streamers and to be like friendly to streamers, and
Mm-hmm.
I want them to be able to finish it so that players will be players will be satisfied seeing the whole thing, and then maybe they'll buy it themselves, throw some money my way.
Mm-hmm.
But if they get if they don't finish it, then maybe the viewer will try it themselves. They'll have more of a desire to do it themselves. But it's a really interesting question. I don't know exactly how to answer it. But I do think that um, I do not think that they should be. I don't really believe in taking pride in making a really difficult game, but I also don't believe in like shaming developers into like changing their vision for their game. Like if they want their game to be hard,
Mm-hmm.
like Titan Souls. Titan Souls was like a Souls like that was a like a like a pixelated version of Dark Souls, and it was really really difficult. And there's a couple of bosses in Titan Souls that are really notorious for being
yes.
hard. And I really there was such a sense of accomplishment when I finally finished the game. Um, and you know, and that's my personal experience. The Dark Souls series, I think that they're challenging. I don't think that they're like super difficult. I think if you're impatient and playing it for the first time, you can have a hard time because it does require a lot of patience and strategy and stuff. But like then again, I can't imagine the showdown with Sans in Undertale to be anything other than what it is, which
Mm-hmm.
is an extremely challenging bullet hell, like no holds barred, boss battle that you really have to dedicate yourself to
Oh
the
yes.
uh, to the what do you call it? The massacre run, the genocide run. You know, you got to really be determined to get it to finish that boss fight.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I would ever, me personally, I don't think I would ever make a game that was like notoriously difficult. I think I think I always want to have a way out. I'm interested in designing a game someday that has a lot of that has a lot of opportunities to recover from errors. I think that's really interesting. I think there was oh, what's his face, Mark Brown. I think he did a episode on games that are really good at letting you recover from errors,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's okay to make mistakes. It's just you're going to have a really interesting time. You're going to have an extra challenge recovering from those mistakes and getting back into the game loop. That you enjoy. So I don't know. I don't have the answer for it yet, but I think it's a really interesting issue.
Yep, I think it's very tricky because I've written several posts and made videos about this idea of approachability and design a game
Oh,
that
okay.
can kind of excuse me, that allows people to experience it, while accessibility is more about outside issues, or getting around or solving issues like subtitles, colorblind,
Yeah,
custom
stuff like that.
controls, and it is a very tough balance, I think, because, like you said, like on one hand, making a game approachable, I think, should be the goal of every developer. But the problem is that what makes a game approachable is different for every single person. There is no, one size fits all for approachability, just as there is no one size fits all for accessibility. And like difficulty settings, I think, is one that I think a lot of people fall into that trap. That if a game has an easy mode, it's automatically accessible, and I don't agree with that. I think it's better to design a game around multiple skill levels and kind of like that band-aid fix.
Yeah. I think that let's see what was so going back to Dark Souls. So there is an easy mode for Dark Souls, and that's using ranged weapons. Just spamming ranged weapons for the most part. And there's strategies for cheesing the bosses. It just takes a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of grinding to get the gear that you want. Or you could go the glitch route and you could glitch your way through the bosses and stuff.
Or you can
Um,
summon people to help you too.
Right, assuming there's still people on the servers, it's getting harder and harder on Dark Souls 3 to get help with Dark Eater Midir. That's like that boss is like the bane of my existence. But anyway, so I've played games all my life that had like adjustable difficulty modes, like easy, normal, hardcore, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I also admire games that have no preset difficulty modes, but they have ways that they afford strategies that make the game easier if that's what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I also like when games allow you to kind of make things more challenging in different ways, as opposed to just, here, let's just give every enemy 500 more points of health. Have fun, it's now harder.
Yeah, and Stalker is one of my all-time favorite games, like, ever. And it does have difficulty mode, but what you're really supposed to do is crank it up to the highest difficulty. That should be the default on Stalker. But there's such a wide range of gear and weapons and loadouts to go out and have your adventures with. You can you can go through the game in an exosuit with with the Gauss cannon, which is the most accurate, most powerful weapon in the game, and and you could have like a very powerful loadout. But some days I just want to leave the base in like a leather jacket in like an old SKS with like 10 rounds of ammo and just see how I do, So yeah, I like the freedom of making things hard on myself, or easy on myself. I purposefully saved my Magnum rounds for the end of Resident Evil 8 because I didn't want to mess around with the final boss. And then someone in the chat mentioned adaptive difficulty, so that requires a little bit of algorithmic know-how to kind of seamlessly do it. And I would be willing to bet that Resident Evil Village had it, especially when you're like fighting all the mobs of enemies in the village, like the Lycans and stuff. So, and that's another route too. I personally noticed the adaptive difficulty a lot in Resident Evil 2 Remake, and I didn't like it for some reason. For some reason, I noticed it more, and I didn't like it more in Resident Evil 2, but I was okay with it in Resident Evil 8. So they did some fine tuning there that made it okay for me. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to approach it, and very long-winded way to answer your question, but that's kind of how I'm working through it.
Yeah. You're hitting up new game mode and Faith crossless difficulty.
No, but you can play it flashlight only and lantern only in chapter 1. You can unlock those modes.
Nice. Yeah, and it is a very interesting discussion, especially when we relate it to the horror genre. Because horror is, like we've said, like it's in that very weird position where the independent space is certainly blowing up with it, but I still feel like mainstream really hasn't, caught wind to all the indie games that are being released out here.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot more publishing opportunities for indies that are being offered by AAA games. So I think maybe something will happen with that.
Yeah. And especially with Resident Evil 8, like I'm still waiting to see another AAA developer kind of go down the horror route now that Resident Evil is kind of back in the public eye.
Yeah.
See, I think I have a few more questions for you. And for the chat watching, I think this will be... yeah. For the chat, this will be officially last call for questions. So if you have anything for Airdorf regarding Faith or horror design, please get them in now, because once I'm finished, I think with this set of questions, we'll begin to wrap things up for the evening. So, let me pull up, I actually have the email that I sent you as well here. But, getting back to kind of Faith, and one thing that I wanted to ask you, and this will kind of segue into talking about the kind of the Unholy Trilogy that's coming out. But when I see developers who work on like standalone or chapter based games in that format, developers like Dave Gilbert from Wadget Eye, Dave Zeminski from Dusk, of course,
Yeah.
and when we see this kind of this evolution of chapter by chapter, like as a developer becomes more confident and accustomed with their design, and usually lets them experiment or go to different places. So with Faith, I guess how much has working like when you first released chapter one, that was kind of considered its own standalone thing, and then you had the demos for two and three. Like now that you're kind of focusing more on them, has like your sense of design or style changed, working on chapter 3 versus working on chapter 1?
Yeah. So chapter 1 was definitely a learning experience for me. And I'm still learning new things, which is good. With chapter 3, I learned how to partially draw sprites. Then you can script that and and make do like a wipe effect for sprites. Anyway, I'm still learning like new techniques and stuff. Design wise, I think I'm more committed than ever to make sure that every single so I try to define my game design framework is before you even start coding or anything or prototyping, you figure out what the narrative, what the mechanics, and what the affect is. Affect with an A,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which is the emotional impact that you want the player to have or the emotional experience. I want the player to feel scared. I want the player to feel adventurous. I want the player to feel like they are an assassin, sent back to ancient Greece. Something like that. I want them to feel like you are in this village where danger could pop out at you at any moment. And so um, that's what I start with. It worked out really well for me with Summer Night. I think Summer Night is an example of me really committing to that kind of framework. And so nowadays, especially with Chapter 3, my chief concern is delivering a scary game. I want, when people think of the scariest games they've ever played, I want them to think of Faith. And that's a lot of pressure, especially since I've been working on Chapter 3 now for 3 years, 2 years, 2.5 years, something like that. And I've been working on it so long that there are parts of it that don't even seem scary to me anymore. So I have to send it out to New Blood for feedback. Yeah, kind of how you got desensitized after Fatal Frame
Yeah.
3, right? And as the creator, I play and I iterate through these moments in the game over and over again that they don't even seem scary to me anymore after a long time. That's when I started doubting myself. I doubted myself very heavily in while I was working on chapter 2. I was afraid of like sequelitis, and I'm even more afraid of it now. And so I have to send it out and get feedback from New Blood and from, trusted individuals in my inner circle, so to speak. And and they'll usually help me. They'll usually reassure me that this is in fact a scary game. One thing that I find myself doing is streamlining and trying to make things as elegant as possible because I never know when I'm going to go back to the source code and change things later on down the line or modify something. And so yes, I did question my faith in the game during chapter 2. It was very ironic. And so anyway, that's kind of what I'm focusing on now. There's some stuff that I would like to change, maybe graphically in chapter 1, and there's some stuff I would like to add in chapter 2, but I really want to keep them. Hold on just a second. Joan, chill. We got a thunderstorm over at the house and my dog's freaking out. So anyway, before I leave, that'll take care of her. She's high anxiety. She's one of those dogs. She's a dog that needs a therapy dog. And but anyway, where was I? Yeah, mostly just really trying to commit to the horror aspect. Faith is narrative driven, but I don't want people to play it necessarily for the story. I want them to play it because they've heard that it's like one of the scariest games of all time.
And this question came in, I forgot to ask earlier. Where is it?
Oh, here's one. Do you think it's possible to have a scary action game as opposed to an action game with horror theme? Yes, Dead Space. Dead Space was 1 and 2 are great examples of an action horror, a scary action game.
Mm-hmm. And again, like that's another like hour and a half we could certainly ramble about when it comes to survival horror versus action horror.
Yeah, one of my all-time favorites.
Oh yes. Oscar asks, will these standalone demos be included in the full release?
Yeah, they will be. The Chapter 3 one, not so much, because the demo for Chapter 3 is a scaled down version of one of the actual levels in Chapter 3.
Mm-hmm.
So with Chapter 3, I didn't go the Chapter 2 route where the demo for Chapter 2 is like a standalone game that is kind of apart or separated from the actual game. So what I'll do is I'll have Chapter 1, and then if you were to play the game in linear fashion, I guess, then you would play Chapter 1 and then the demo for Chapter 2, and then the full Chapter 2, and then you would play Chapter 3.
Okay.
Yeah, so the demo for Chapter 3 that you play on the Steam version is not it's not cut out of the game, but it is a kind of like a vertical slice of Chapter 3.
And of course, before we forget, I guess the most important question from Oscar: when is it coming out?
Yeah, every time someone asks that, it gets delayed a month. So watch it. I'm just kidding. So my current situation is that I work a day job, and I'm also married, and I also have a baby to take care of, and I have other obligations and stuff. So I really New Blood is very patient with me. I really have very little time to actually work on the game. I work on it every night, or every day at least. But yeah, I unfortunately I don't have time to dedicate to it like full time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that once I release it, and maybe if I get some income from it, I might switch to full time. I would really like that.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, I have precious little time to work on it, and I get asked every day when it's going to come out. I love that they ask it, but still I feel pressure. But it is being worked on, and I'm implementing the final parts of the game. Let's just say that.
There we go.
Of Chapter 3 at least. So after I do that, then I have to stitch together all 3 chapters and do a bunch of menu stuff and do a lot of logistical stuff. So I would really like it to be released this year, maybe towards the end of the year, but I can't promise anything right now.
All right. Lilith asked us earlier, is Alu causing John's nightmares?
Oh, Alu, yeah. Not necessarily. It's not necessarily one like creature or being causing the nightmares.
Oh, and just for my clarification, is Chapter 2 like done or available standalone, or will be all packaged in the Unholy Trilogy?
Yeah, if you pay $1, you can get it on itch.io and GameJolt, but it's going to be depreciated by the time I do the Unholy Trinity. So if you absolutely can't wait, then yeah, you can play it there. Mm-hmm. But also there'll be an expanded version in the Unholy Trinity.
Okay.
It'll have some extra stuff.
Gotcha. And in terms of design, again, like when it comes to horror games, it's hard to talk about design because anything we talk about is pretty much leading into spoiler territory. So I've been kind of avoiding asking too many direct questions. One thing that I wanted to ask, kind of to get back to discussion about difficulty, with the encounters in all 3 chapters of Faith.
Yeah.
What has been your approach? We've already kind of talked about difficulty, but in terms of designing them, because part of the challenge of horror, and I'm sure with Faith itself, is that it's not a direct combat game. You're not running around fighting monsters or shooting enemies, as you said. So, what has been your approach to designing these encounters to, be unique, but still, offer, that sense of conflict or challenge?
Yeah. So, what I think is interesting about my games is that even though they're like chunky pixels and like super basic characters and monsters, there's still a bit of strategy, and you can get like a pretty wide range of like gameplay and kind of behaviors and AI out of such a simple setup. I like to think of level design as designing movement and navigation through space that is restrained by the mechanics of the game. So, you know, playing through Super Mario Brothers 1-1 as Sonic the Hedgehog is a very different experience than playing as Fred Flintstone from the Flintstone NES game. Uh, when game designers design a level or like an encounter or a moment in a game, well, they have if they're doing it right, they have the mechanics, and the affordances of the game in general in mind. So depending on how uh, it an encounter with like a demon or like a creature in the game, I take into account the screen space that's available. There's a really scary encounter in Fatal Frame 2 where you have to fight these possessed doll ghosts, and then you have to fight them again, but you have to fight them in a much smaller space, like a very, very small room, and it's a super intense fight. And just changing the environment, just changing like the scale of the environment made the same enemy even more scary and the same encounter even more scary. And so I like to play around with space as far as the layout of a certain screen that you're in. It's always fun to have some sort of restraint on the environment. Like the boss can traverse over this, but you can't. So you have to be more strategic about how you navigate. There's an enemy in Resident Evil 8. There's a boss battle in Resident Evil 8 that was a lot like that. Like they had like a flamethrower attack that like made parts of the floor on fire, and he had to and there were little bald spots in the fire, and he had to kind of navigate through. But they were fireproof, so they didn't care. They just walked right through it. So stuff like that is really interesting to me. So to keep it interesting, I tweak variables like like the speed of the demon or their health, and also environmental affordances like in the level design and stuff. And there's enough there to keep things interesting, in my opinion. Also, I try to have a lot of like one-off enemies that are like, well, that thing was weird, kind of things. I will occasionally do like a recurring enemy, if I'm trying to like build up a moment. But I also like having just like, what the hell was that thing, kind of encounters.
I have to ask, did you play a Yuppie Psycho by any chance? I really enjoyed that one too.
No, I know the dev, and I've messaged them a couple times. We've communicated before, but I haven't gotten around to playing it, unfortunately.
All right. Because I think that's always been a challenge of horror games is keeping it sustained from beginning to end. And I think too many horror games they don't either space out their content enough, or they don't have enough content to kind of keep the player invested. I think it was kind of one of the issues I had with RE8, that by the end of it, I was just like, yeah, okay, I'm still fighting werewolves. Here's my shotgun, kill them very easily.
Yeah, I think with the Lycans, they tried to up the, they play with space. The first, a good example is like the armored Lycan that has the mask and it has like the shoulder pads and stuff. The first one that you encounter is very straightforward. I think there's only one of them on basic difficulty, and it's just coming towards you. And I think you get a landmine right before that, so you know exactly what to do. Weaken it with an explosive, and then you shoot it until it dies. But later on, you encounter one in a crowd of Lycans, and then by the end of the game, you're fighting like 3 at a time. And so that's one way that you can take like one type of enemy and kind of reintroduce it, except this time, you know, and they did that in the factory too. Sorry, spoilers for Resident Evil Village, but there's enemies in the factory level that get progressively more like deadly
Mm-hmm.
and like ridiculous, and then they put you in these cramped spaces until finally you're in the dark with the power off with your flashlight trying to do something, and they're coming after you in the dark. And so even more limited visibility, so you can't like negotiate your space, and strategize how you're going to use and navigate the space to avoid them and fight them as easily. I think that there's some good stuff in that. I think I'll have to play through like New Game Plus on Resident Evil Village to have like a definitive
Mm-hmm.
opinion of it. I really liked it for what it was. I thought it was nuts, even more nuts than Resident Evil 7. Like they really went places with
Oh
Resident Evil
yes.
Village. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to playing it again eventually, but for now I think I'm kind of exhausted and I'll move on to something else.
All right. This question from Cersei. This will be our last one, I think. If you had infinite money and time, what project would you like to make?
Ooh, ooh. I would make like a larger scale, like kind of PS2 era survival horror game. I have a ton of game ideas. I keep them all in like a spreadsheet, and there's like 50 of them at least. And I'll never have enough time in my life to finish them all, which is kind of depressing. But at least I'll never run out of ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a game idea I had that was like, something like Final Fantasy X, except the combat is through music, and so you collect characters that know different instruments, and when you're battling with your team, their instruments come together to form new genres of music.
Oh, right.
So you can have like a bongo player, and then have like a guitar player, and then have like a bagpipes player. Um, and then I had this weird fantasy of having Lindsay Sterling as one of the characters, and she has her violin and stuff. And but anyway, that's something I would do if I had like infinite funds.
Nice.
Um, I would if I had infinite money and time. Yeah, it would be something like that. Um, I would try to. I would if I had all the money in the world and all the time in the world, I would try to do like a really really big like this is my horror game. This is like my magnum opus or magnus opus or whatever it's called.
All right. So, before we kind of wrap things up, anything else regarding Faith from a design or development standpoint that we didn't touch on that you'd like to bring up?
No, one of my first GDC talk is on the GDC YouTube channel, and it goes a lot more in depth into the art and visual style of Faith and the visual design and how I approached it. You'll get to see all the cool influences and inspirations that kind of helped me mold the art style of Faith. And then next week, actually a week from now, I'm going to be presenting on my second GDC talk, which is more about the horror design, not just the visual design. So if any of y'all are attending GDC, then check it out. I think it's on Thursday or Tuesday. I forget when.
I think with that, we will wrap things up. So, Airdorf, it's been an absolute pleasure hanging out with you tonight. If you are free in the future, I'd love to have you back on. We can talk more about horror design, reminisce about our favorite horror games.
Yeah, I'd like that. After Faith gets released, like when it gets released, I might take a break for a little bit, but then I might launch into like a collab that I've really wanted to do for a long time. So yeah, I'd love to talk again when that stuff starts coming out.
All right. So, to end things for tonight, I guess first off, do you have any social media you would like to plug for people to find you, anything like that?
Yeah, it's just at Airdorf on Twitter. That's the best way to contact me. That's the best way to follow up on stuff. If you want updates on Chapter 3, that's where I post them. And that's really like the one and only place you need to go to like connect with me.
All right. And do you have any final thoughts, anything you'd like to say to the fans to end our cast on?
Yeah, thanks everybody for your questions and your comments in the chat. It's been great like meeting all of y'all and chatting with y'all. I think that games are the ultimate form of creativity, something that I always wanted to do, and I'm very, very happy and fulfilled knowing that I'm entertaining at least some people and scaring some people with my games. It makes it all worth it when people like email me, and tell me what my games mean to them, and the experiences they've had with my games. Stuff like that keeps us going, or it keeps me going at least, and is a great reminder of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So thank you everyone so much for kind of taking a chance on me and my games, and I'm really, really excited to show y'all Chapter 3. Just please hold on while I finish it.
All right.
And thank you, Josh, for having me. You've been great.
Yep, and thanks again for coming on. Like I said, it was an absolute pleasure hanging with you, and thank you again for reaching out.
Yeah.
All right. So, with that said, everyone, we are going to wrap things up. For those of you watching this live, I will be back on way later for my game streams. I'm going to be having a very late dinner after our great discussion. Be sure to check out, of course, Faith. I'll include links to that as well as to Airdorf's Twitter and more down in the description. If you are a developer working on an upcoming game and would like to come on to talk about it, definitely feel free to reach out. I'm always looking for new guests. And if you'd like to support the channel, be sure to check out our Discord and Patreon link down below. That's going to do it for our talk tonight. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, everybody, take care.